In this video, we're gonna go over a step-by-step tutorial for one of my favorite lat exercises, the single arm cable lat pull down. Now, just for reference, this is your whole lat muscle, and your lat muscle has 3 parts, and this pull down motion is gonna be an exercise which trains the lowest portion. So you have a yellow, you have a blue, and you have a red portion of your lat, and they all kind of fan up into the arm. The ones that run most vertically, the ones that run lowest, are gonna be the fibers that are most challenged with this variation. However, keep in mind that the upper portions of the lats will also be plenty challenged with this variation. So first we're gonna go over the major setup tips, and then we're gonna go over the major execution tips. The setup basically loads the gun, and the execution fires it. All right, so the first thing that you wanna make sure that you do is sit on one side of the pad. This is a little bit unusual, but if you're getting into any kind of cable lat pull down station, you're gonna wanna position yourself to one side because it is a single-sided exercise, and a lot of the pulleys that you commonly see won't rotate with your arm. So basically what that means is that you wanna be able to pull straight down in the middle of the pad, which again is why you're scooting to one side or another. So if I'm going to do the pull down with my right arm, I'm going to position myself so that I'm on the left side of the seat, and so my right leg is underneath of the pad. If I'm doing a pull down with my left arm, I'm gonna scoot over all the way to the right side of the seat and position my left leg underneath of the pad. The second thing we're gonna do is position the appropriate pad height. A lot of people make the mistake of having the pad way too high so they're not actually secured down into the seat. It should be a little bit tight getting into it, but you should make sure that you do have room to kind of do a little bit of a calf raise. So you want to be able to scoot your leg in, somewhat easily, but not super easily. Then the third thing that you're going to do before we get into how to actually perform the exercise from a motion perspective is you're going to lean backward. This is one of my cats, by the way. He likes to listen to me talk about this stuff. So anyway, what the lean is going to do is it's basically just going to do the equivalent of like angling your arms slightly forward, right? So rather than having the pulley directly up over your head, we want to lean the torso back just a little bit, kind of like this, so that the angle of pull is slightly up in front of the body. And that's basically just so that we can give the lats a little bit more of a direct line of pull to move the arm down, and also just pulling from an angle that's a little bit more up and forward as compared to directly overhead tends to be more comfortable for a vast majority of people, especially me, in my experience. Right now, so when it comes to execution, we want to kind of start from the floor up, just like we did before. We're on one side of the pad, and when we scoot our foot underneath of the pad, the first thing that you're going to do is do a calf raise up into it, right? Because again, as we mentioned, you want to be able to squeak into the pad, but the whole time you want to actually make sure that you're 100% locked in, secured to the seat. So do a calf raise down into the floor so that your leg pushes up into the pad so that you're totally stable before you even initiate the pull down. So that's step number 1. Step number 2 is going to be to make sure you use your non-working hand to grab whatever is in front of you to prevent your body from twisting and turning. Because you're doing a single arm motion, what's going to happen is as soon as you start to pull, your torso is either going to get pulled upward and kind of toward the side. You might also get twisted away from the direction of your working arm. So make sure you're using your non-working hand to just grab something in front of you so that you can keep your torso perfectly in place and perfectly still. Remember, we said we want to do a little bit of a lean back type of thing, and so that's another reason just to basically lock your hand in to make sure that you're keeping your torso exactly where you want it to be. All right, step number 3, the actual initiation of the pull. Well, the first and sort of broadest principle that you need to keep in mind is that you want the cable to be parallel to your forearm for a vast majority of the reps. And the reason is this is the case is because a lot of people, when they pull, they kind of pull their hand toward their shoulder like this. And so what you'll notice is that if the cable is kind of going this way, that's not actually parallel to my forearm. When the cable is parallel to the forearm, it's basically just going to load the shoulder, right? So when you see people kind of going like this, right, this is an exaggeration, but people go like this, or they do a minor version of this, it's going to load the elbow muscles, the biceps, the brachialis, the brachioradialis. And while those are part of any pull down exercise, we want to mostly be loading the shoulder and the lats. This is a lat exercise. So make sure that you're keeping the forearm parallel to the cable. And this is kind of to part 4 of the execution section here, which is when you're doing the pull down, when you initiate the pull down, try to imagine not really pulling with your hand. Don't imagine that like you have a lot of pressure in your hands and you're focused on your fingers and you're trying to yank with your fingers. Imagine that you're pulling from one of two things or both of these things. One could be your elbow. Pull with your elbow rather than your hand. Driving with your elbow, by the way, this whole thing is your elbow, but this is really the bottom of your upper arm. So when people say, okay, pull with your elbow, what they're really meaning is pull with the bottom of your humerus bone. So you can initiate the pull down from the elbow. You can also initiate, and this is something that not many people use as a cue, which I think is criminally underrated, is pulling with your armpit. Well, why would you want to pull with your armpit? Well, that's where the lats attach, is right up here in your armpit. So yes, you can pull from the bottom of this bone, again, the elbow, the humerus really, but you can also simultaneously, boom, shrug, or really reverse shrug down with your armpit as you pull. And a combination of focusing on this bony prominence right here in the armpit and allowing both of those things to move up and move down, that's going to be a game changer in terms of execution for this motion. So focus on the elbow, focus on the armpit, focus on whatever just feels better for you. Some final thoughts on this exercise and some additional bits of information that may help you. Number one is use straps. Highly advise using straps. You don't want your forearm to get tired. You don't want your forearm to be a rate limiter. But even if your forearm is capable of handling whatever load you're capable of pulling, using straps actually makes it easier for people to cue things like pull through the elbow or pull through the armpit. When you don't have to focus so much on what's going on in your fingers, you tend not to want to pull with your fingers. Whereas people who don't use straps, they tend to want to do a lot of weird stuff with their hands. And again, not to mention that the forearms and the hands might be fatigued, which is no good. Now, the biggest mistake that people are going to make with this exercise in terms of actual execution is not really understanding or learning how to actually coordinate their shoulder girdle. In other words, motion like this, like shrugging and unshrugging with motion of the arm. So again, this is shrugging and unshrugging, and then this is motion of the arm. Basically, with this pull down, you want to combine motion of the arm with what's called depression of the shoulder, which in simple terms just means anti-shrug, right? Pulling the armpit down toward the floor, which is a big part of the reason why I like to use that armpit cue. So as you pull, yes, remember that whole thing about keeping the cable in line with the forearm. That will kind of naturally happen if you're pulling with your elbow and your armpit simultaneously downward as a reverse shrug. But then here's the key, and here's where people go wrong, is as the arm comes up, a lot of times they try to keep all of this stuff here as they're moving their arm upward toward the ceiling. I wouldn't advise that. If you need to do that as a starting point for just kind of understanding control and learning the movement, that's totally fine. But you want to get to a point where you're allowing everything to kind of come up, and where at the top of the range of motion, you're sort of allowing your armpit to almost reach toward the cable like this so that you can actually get a full stretch on these lats, because this top portion of the range is really where those lats are going to be able to take over relative to all other muscles that could perform this action. So make sure that you're allowing the upper arm to move. Yes, make sure you're keeping that cable parallel to the forearm, but also make sure that you're allowing that sort of shrug to happen toward the top of the range, reaching up and forward toward the cable, like you're like, oh, I need to grab the cable, and then pulling down against the cable and reversing that where you're driving your armpit, driving your elbow down toward the floor. And then the last thing that I wanted to mention is some of you may be T-Rex-like, where you have arms that are this long and you just, you jump up to the cable, you pull it down, no problem. Others of you may look like Slender Man and may have Slender Man arms and may have really long torsos. And it may be the case that when you do the pull down, the weight just ends up sort of running into itself at the bottom because your arms are so long you can't actually get a full stretch. So if that's you, what I would recommend is instead of sitting down on one side, what you can do is you can actually kneel down on one side and then sneak your knee under the pad in the same way that we were talking about before. And if that doesn't work and you're still, your arms are still too long, the weight is still hitting the thing, you could literally try to like sneak underneath of the seat, although at that point you might want to just consider a different setup altogether. If you like this style of video, please drop a comment below to let me know that you like the style. And if this video was helpful in taking out the guesswork related to this exercise, I have an exercise video library. It has over 300 tutorials, a mix of short and long form, and it's basically dedicated to just take all of the confusion out of lifting instantly. So if that sounds good to you, it's currently running at an over 60% discount. Click the link in the description below to download the exercise library. You buy it once, you have access for life. So if the library ends up gaining tens and hundreds of exercises over the next, let's say, year, you'll have access to all those future exercises at no additional cost if you purchase now. The price will go up over time after I add more and more exercises. The library started with 200 exercises and now it's over 300. So click the link in the description below. Thanks for watching. See you all in the next one.